my name's Reed Applegate. I'm here with Sal Casa at the Chico Art Center, where they are having a retrospective show of his works from mid-June to mid-July 2014. There are 54 years worth of artwork being displayed. So I want to ask you, Sal, how did you get into art?
Well, that's easy. Right from the beginning, being raised in Manhattan and being exposed to all the ballet, the opera, the museums. My parents, would constantly take me out to the different venues that were going on, and the Metropolitan Museum was one of the major places we'd go to visit. It was free, and you just wandered in and looked, and of course my dad would always point out this was painted by an Italian. Of course, he was very proud of this. Although there were other nationalities in the museum, he always seemed to point out the Italians. And also, as a child, when I was a young man, 8, 9, 10, I was exposed to magazines. And if you looked at the magazines of those days, it was all pictures. There were no photographs. There were the illustrators and the comic strips. The pictures fascinated me. Then when I was working as a delivery boy I'd be going to school and then have part-time jobs. I was working in a building. I was actually the Daily Mirror. And on the 10th floor was United Features, and King Features was in the Daily News. And you would have access to all these illustrators and artists. The pictures came very easily and quickly.
Well, you were also in New York at the time in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
It was becoming the art capital of the world.
That was my godparents were the abstract expressionists. Because as we were going to school, especially the School of Visual Arts, we'd go down to the Cedar Street Tavern, where Pollock and Klein and de Kooning and all of them hung out. And we'd go in and get a beer, and sometimes they'd be in there. Most of the time they weren't. And it was, and also what was interesting about that time was that the museums were still catering to work that was inspired by work that was done in Europe. Picasso, Matisse, Cézanne. And so you had this group of painters down in the village past 10th Street that were trying to develop an American art, whatever that means. And they actually did it. They broke through. There was a time when the museum would mount shows, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art had mounted a show, and I forget whether it was 1950 or 49, where it was American painting of that time. But none of the people that were actually doing American painting were included. So they wrote this letter, and they sent it to the New York Times, and they published it. And then Life picked it up and took this famous photograph. It's called the Irascibles. And there you have I think there's 15 or 16 people, but what's interesting about that photo, there's only one woman in it. Ida Stern, I think was her name. And she's the tallest one in the photo. And it also reflected on the difficulty women were having in those days to show their work and be accepted as painters as well as the men. Well, de Kooning was one of the most popular ones. And the way he worked, de Kooning worked in an interesting way that many people could work like de Kooning. Picasso is not that great a painter, but he's a great innovator. And Picasso would give out ideas, and artists would look at this and say, wow, I can do some of this. And so he would feed a lot of people. They could work from his ideas, not as well as Picasso, but they would come up with different things that went on. If you take an artist like, say, Andrew Wyatt, his image is closed. So when people went to Wyatt for information or knowledge, they didn't get anything but bad Wyatts were produced, because Wyatt was so into his image that when you look at Andrew Wyatt's work, he gives you nothing. It's very personal, it's very intimate, it's very of his time. But Picasso is an innovator. And when we were going to school, like if you look at Jackson Pollock, when he dripped paint all over the place, he actually opened the door for many people to work, because his concept of what was art was totally different than what was being produced at the time. Most of the pictures painted were easel paintings. They were on easels. Pollock took this space and started dripping the paint. And it's interesting that people would see it and say, oh, my kid can do that. Well, their kids couldn't do it. When you deal with this originality, where does it come from? Most work that you see in books and most of the work in here is really generic because it comes from another source. In other words, things that attract me, images, not that I'm copying someone, but the work that I'm dealing with, I'm very safe in what I deal with, because in other words, sometimes I'll put the word querencia in my painting, and querencia means place of safety. It's a term that's used in Spanish bullfighting. And so when a bull gets into this querencia, he's very secure amongst himself. So when I'm painting some of these things, I'll actually write in querencia, I'm in a place of safety. And sometimes I'll write in perché ti amo. And a woman bought a painting once thinking that perché ti amo means because I love you. And she thought it meant that because I loved her. No, it was because I loved painting. And letters, I like to...
Well, that's what I was going to say. That leads me into your use of letters and words and phrases in your paintings.
Letters to me are abstract symbols. All right, the English language, the 26 letters we know, but when you look at Hebrew or Semitic or Greek or Egyptian, they're beautiful marks. But letters to me are important also. Sometimes I will actually misspell a word in a painting. And one day a person came up to me and said, Sal, you misspelled that word. I said, great, you read my work. So people are reading. Today, how many people write letters? How many people can add and subtract without a machine? So the printed word, they look like this piece on 9/11, where I was reading Tennyson, and then the situation happened, and I remembered the phrase he had written in one of his poems. So I immediately, this piece was created that night, and I went to Tennyson and pulled out the word. And then I looked at it and I said, this word is misspelled, and the reap is reaped. If you look at reap, it's R-E-A-P and then D, but that's the way it's written in the poem. They'd leave out some letters in the 19th century when they wrote. And it's and painting for me is, I get very excited. I'm 86 years old, and I'm starting what I think is a new phase, and I'm like a child. When I come to this stuff, the ideas just flow and flow, and so sometimes I'll be working on something, and something will stir my mind, and I'll put that aside and start something else. It's just, it's an ongoing, and I've been fortunate. This is important. I mean, I've been lucky in my health, and I still want to paint.
Yeah, I'd like to swing to your social commentary that infuses several of your works,
yeah.
And I wondered how you got into thinking in that direction.
Well, I've always been curious and involved with world situations, and I'm very upset in the way our leaders all over the world, leaders of people, get people into situations that are impossible to solve. It's just, and the only way I can express myself is, with putting it on paper. I made reproductions of the copies of Titian and so that I had found in the library, and for 2 weeks I painted it in color. And it was terrible. It was just not working, and I kept looking and I said, what am I doing wrong? Then I thought of Picasso's Guernica that he painted in 1937 or 38 during the Spanish Civil War, and this town of Guernica was used as a tryout base for the Nazis and whatever to use their dive bombers. But Picasso had only news from the radio and newspapers. So one of the reasons he painted it in black and white, when you see the image, it's all black and white and gray, is because of this reason. So I immediately took the imagery I had and glued it on the panel, and I had them all in black and white. Then I said, this needs something else. So I started digging up names of where man has encountered man. Dallas, you name it, the Katyn Forest, all the civil rights images. If people read those names, they begin to realize what's going on in the world. And then I said it needs something else. Of course, Israel. I put down Israel. Then I went and found an Arabian person. I said, how do you spell Palestine? And this went into it. Then I kept looking at it and I said, it still needs something else. And then I said, the Bible. And I always read the Bible. From time to time, I open it and just read it. And I remembered in Kings, in David, there's a statement that says, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for it is his battle, and he will deliver you into our hands. So I said, I'll put this in. So I started in to put it in, but it wouldn't fit. So I just put in the top part, and then the piece was complete. When you read a novel, you're dealing with words, and you're creating images in your head that the author has given you through these words. When you're listening to music, you're listening to sounds, and you're creating a certain feeling or mood. And so when you're dealing with removing stuff from whatever, it's, to me, it's not addition, but subtraction that makes the art. It's what's left out of it. A lot of people will not accept this. When you look at, like Pollock, drip paint, and he kept dripping paint and dripping paint. But once he dripped paint, what Pollock did was liberate the line. So he let the line live free. So to me, that's high art. Hopefully, the Lord will give me the strength to keep working and make stronger images, more poetic ones, more nothing. I'll end up with a blank piece of paper. Someone said, one day I'm going to come into one of your shows and you're going to have a blank piece of paper frame and call it eternity. To me, that makes a great deal of sense.